Chapter 7. We start again with an excerpt from Dr. Chen's notes. His face is that of a lion. His body is covered in sharp scales. He has claws of a vulture and the horns of a wild bull. When he looks at someone, it is the look of death. Umbaba's roar is a flood. His mouth is deaf and his breath is fire. He can hear 100 leagues away any rustling in his forest. Who would go down into his forest? And that is an excerpt from the Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 3. Mark pulled up the security camera footage again, hoping to find some clue, some breadcrumb that might lead him to Maddie and Emma. But if it was there, he wasn't seeing it. Despite his horror that Emma had finished the orca, he couldn't help but be impressed that she had made the damn thing work. He played the tape once more, this time focusing on pulling up the sounds, trying to figure out exactly how she had tuned in to the monster. What frequency to look for to help them spot the orca when it was used again. It was all too messy, but maybe if he could isolate the orca sounds. He reviewed the footage again, just listening this time. When Emma first turned the orca on, there wasn't anything, no reaction from Mothra, but she'd done something. He ran it back and heard it one more time. This time he got it. You bypassed the low-end harmonics, he murmured. Pretty smart girl. He smiled at the image of her on the screen, remembering their early years together, dreaming about this thing. She could be stubborn, but when she got hold of something, he realized looking back on it, when they'd agreed to stop work on the project, that it had really been his idea. She'd never wanted to abandon it. Now she had perfected it. Despite everything, he was proud of her for that. But it was still a bad idea to use it. She'd been lucky so far, but he felt in his gut that luck wasn't going to hold. Then the gunshots rang out. The anarchists appeared, and Mark snapped back to reality. The monitor almost seemed to shake from the explosion it was portraying. No, the monitor was shaking. The whole facility was. Colonel Foster's voice blared from the loudspeakers. All personnel report to battle stations, she said. Code Red, this is not a drill. Code Red, I repeat, Code Red. By the time she finished, Mark was on his feet and heading out the door. When he reached the command center, he saw the whole station was on lockdown. Their beautiful undersea view was now hidden behind thick, ugly blast doors. Were they expecting torpedoes or something? Was Jonah attacking Castle Bravo? Barnes, Martinez, Griffin, and the rest of the G team were already there, standing in loose ranks but at ease. Stanton was there too. Dr. Chen. Mark went over to her station. What's happening? He asked. Something's wrong, she replied. He's never been this close before. Who's he? He demanded. Who do you think? She said. He's taking out our observation drones, Vivini said. Mark saw what she meant. As screen after screen was swallowed by static, there was a sudden flurry of motion on one, something large moving fast, and then it too cut out. Meanwhile, on radar they were tracking something big. Right, of course, their favorite specimen had turned on them. Huge surprise there. Trajectory, Sarazawa demanded. Straight at us, Stanton informed him. 1,200 meters and closing. G-Team, Colonel Foster barked. Barnes, Martinez, Hendricks, I want you on those crows now. You heard the boss lady, Barnes said. Let's move. As G-Team scrambled into the remote turrets, gigantic guns sprang up all over the base and began adjusting range. Dr. Stanton, do you have his bioacoustics? Sarazawa asked. In response, Stanton fiddled with his equipment, and a deep thudding sound filled the room. It was similar to what Emma had isolated from Mothra. Godzilla's deep heartbeat. Acoustics coming up, Stanton said. Okay, he's closing. We're right at 800 meters. His movements are erratic, Vivni said. Heart and breathing elevated. He's definitely not happy about something, Stanton said. How are you getting all of this? Mark asked Chen. Emma's isolated Godzilla's bioacoustics. It allows us to track him, even to get his vitals. Another low rumble shook the base. Circling now, Stanton said. Closing in, 200 meters. One of the few monitors still working began to brighten with a light that Mark knew all too well. The monster's radioactive aura. Colonel, Serizawa said. All teams in position, Foster commanded. Weapons hot, ready to engage on my command. The unnerving beat of Godzilla's heart grew in volume. Hold your fire, Serizawa said. We don't know he will attack. Well, he will if you keep pointing those guns on him, Mark said. I want this thing dead more than anybody, but unless this is a fight you know you can win, for God's sake, stand down. He waited for the blowback. But if this base had been here for a while, why was Godzilla just now bothering to come take it apart? Unless something in the equation had changed. He was an apex predator, and he sensed a threat of some kind. By deploying the guns, they were proving to him he was right. And if they fought, those guns were going to stop him. They should know better. The floor bucked under Mark's feet. The base, huge as it was, anchored in bedrock, shuddered like a flimsy shack in a hurricane. Stand down, Serizawa said. Foster looked at him. She took a step forward. You can't be serious, sir, she said. Serizawa turned to her. I am, he said. Stand down. Foster paused, frowning. Then she reached slowly up and touched her earpiece. Stand down, she said. I say again, safe your weapons. Do not engage. Listen, Chen said, after a moment. His heart rate, it's slowing. He heard. Pulling in the guns had helped. Godzilla was calming down a little, but not enough. What if Serizawa was right, or at least partly right? What if Godzilla was more than just a monster? Maybe he didn't only recognize active threats, but passive ones too. Open the shields, Mark said. He felt more than saw everyone in the room staring at him. Yeah, sure, Stanton said. Let's bring him in for a beer. Are you out of your goddamn mind? Let him know we're not a threat, Mark said. Open the shields. Mark looked at Serizawa. The scientist's brow creased. Do it, Serizawa said. Colonel Foster clearly didn't like that notion any more than the stand down order, but she grudgingly complied. She pulled a switch, and the blast doors began to rumble up, revealing the deep sea beyond. And what was in it? A huge shape emerging, still mostly light and shadow in the murk, but Mark could see those glowing dorsal spines that could only belong to Godzilla. They'd grown back, obviously. He was about 100 meters out, waiting, watching in the dark. Facing them, his spine slowly brightening, then going dark, leaving only shadow, then lighting up again. It was breathtaking, and for a moment everyone was too stunned to say anything, although Mark noticed Martinez crossing himself. Sergeant Hendricks broke the silence. What's with the light show? He asked. It's an intimidation display, Vivni said, like a gorilla pounding its chest. Consider us very intimidated, Coleman said. I don't think it's for us, Dr. Chen said. Mark didn't think so either. After his encounter with the military a few years back, Godzilla might have gotten into his reptilian brain that the little termites under his feet had weapons that could hurt him, at least a little bit. But if Vivni was right, and she probably was, he wouldn't be responding to them like this. This was more how a predator would respond to a rival for his territory. But was something else out there? Mothra was still in her cocoon. Was yet another monster on the loose? He took a step closer. All of his hatred for the beast was still there, but oddly muted. He had never understood how Emma had felt about these things. Not after what happened. But now, Maybe he appreciated a little of her awe of the creature. But it was more than that. He had a bone-deep feeling that this monster, this titan, this was his link to Maddie and Emma. Somehow Godzilla was going to help him find them. He continued forward. "What are you doing, dude?" Stanton said. Mark ignored him. He closed his eyes, listening, reaching out to the glass, because there was something new out there. A low, heavy growl transmitted through the water, along with deep clicks that reminded him of whale sonar. And there was something else, something he felt rather than heard, but it was so mixed with anger, hatred, regret. He didn't want to know what it was. He didn't care. Then Godzilla's spines faded to black, and they couldn't see anything but the murky water. The odd noises diminished, then stopped altogether. Mark could almost hear the collective sigh of relief, until Godzilla was suddenly there again, charging at the window, incredibly fast, filling their view. There was no way the glass would stop him. And then he blew past again, and was gone. According to the tracking monitors, this time for real. They watched the signal recede. More chest pounding, Mark thought, or maybe just a straight-up fret. Stanton peeked up from behind his workstation. "Can we maybe close the shields now?" he said. As Mark's breathing began to even out, he had an idea. Whatever else he was, Godzilla was a predator, like a wolf or a killer whale, so he would have something in common with them. "Show me his territorial routes," he told Stanton. "What? Why?" Stanton asked. "'Cause I want to start a boat tour," Mark snapped. "Just show me." "Okay, coming up," Stanton said. He pulled up a map of Earth with Godzilla's recorded paths highlighted. It was clear they weren't random. There were some variations, but in general the big lizard followed the same track within a given cycle of time. "Care to tell us what you're looking for?" Colonel Foster asked. "When an animal leaves its hunting ground, it's usually because it's threatened by something," Mark said. The map said it all. Godzilla had recently deviated significantly from his usual walkabout. Something new had entered his territory, and recently something Godzilla hadn't seen yet. Maybe, but he knew it was out there. Maybe it wasn't another Titan Godzilla was reacting to. Maybe it was something that sounded like one. "Run a course projection," Vivni said. Stanton went back to work. Potential paths began arching across the map. "We gotta go after him," Mark said. "He's looking for something out there. It could be the orca." There was nervous silence as the others absorbed that possibility. "Dr. Stanton," Sarazawa said, "what's your projection?" Stanton finally looked up. "All paths have him landing in the same place," Stanton said. "Antarctica." The satellite map zoomed in on the frozen continent to where the projected routes converged at a point in East Antarctica on the coast of the Indian Ocean. "Good then," Mark said. Let's go find them. He looked around at their anxious expressions. "Wait, what's in Antarctica?" "Barnes," Colonel Foster said, "contact the Argo." Once he was sure the operation was going well, Jonah chose one of the office spaces around the lab and lay down on the floor. He had been awake for more than 48 hours, and it was beginning to tell. They had a little time now, but soon he would need all of his wits about him. He dozed. He wasn't sure for how long. When he woke, Asher was in the room, sitting at the desk. "I could have found you a cot," Asher said. Jonah leveled himself up. "I've plenty of experience sleeping on the ground," he said. "How are things proceeding?" "On schedule," Asher said, suppressing a smile. "When they get here, we'll be ready for them." "Better if we're done before they get here," Jonah said. "But it's always best to be prepared." "Why are you grinning like that?" Asher brought up something from behind the desk. A 25-year-old Lafroig. "Found it in one of the offices," he said. He placed 2 tumblers on the table. "Well," Jonah said, "someone has good taste." Asher poured a little in each glass and offered him one. He took it, brought it up to his nose, smelled the peat and smoke, the salt of the seaweed of the North Atlantic. To Monster Zero, Asher said. To the higher cause, Jonah replied. They drank. Takes me back, Jonah said. I was younger than you when I first had this. I had been a few years in Her Majesty's army. Took a leave to Islay, where they make this stuff. Beautiful place. I actually believed then, you know, all that bullshit. The justifications, the outright lies. He took another drink. What changed your mind? Asher asked. Lindsay? You've never said. Lindy? No, maybe that was the tipping point, but no. I had already reached my conclusion. I just needed a push to live my purpose. To that, Asher said, they drank again. You remember when I brought you in, Jonah said, what we were doing? Yeah, that chemical plant in China was my first. Then the thing with the DRC, the big game hunters. God, that those guys deserve everything they got. Little things, Jonah said, chipping away at the walls to a fortress we were never going to be able to destroy. But all that changed when the Titans appeared, when those bloody mutos went careening across the world. We got our hands in 5 years ago, but our dear Dr. Russell shut it down. Just as well. I was still thinking too small, even then, but now I finally know how to do it. I'm glad to be a part of it, Asher said. There is a better world ahead. Yes, there is, Jonah said. He took another sip. People look at the thing in the ice, and they think it's a monster. He shook his head. They're not the monsters. We are. The whole bloody human race. The USS Argo was a flying wing, a boomerang-shaped vehicle with 5 powerful jet engines situated behind the V, where the wings met in the back. The command cabin lay in the front of a ridge in the center of the craft that ran from the cockpit at the nose back to the engines, but there was plenty of space in the wings. Barnes supervised the loading of the gear they'd need in Antarctica and double-checked the status of their onboard arms. So we're finally going on a monster hunt, Hendricks said. Is that what you heard? Barnes asked, because what I got out of the briefing is that we're chasing after a suitcase and a bunch of bad guys. Hendricks said, and a monster, right? It's a containment center. Yeah, Barnes said, we're gonna make sure we keep whatever it is contained. But if it does get out, we'll torch it, right? Barnes caught Hendrix's gaze. Hey, he said, I know you lost your dad in Honolulu. I'm sorry about that. But don't get out ahead of us, understand? You do the job as the colonel calls it. By the numbers, or you stay here. You know me, Hendricks replied. I'm no loose cannon. I just want to be clear about our options if things go wrong. The colonel will break all that down before we get there. It's a long way to Antarctica, even in this thing. When Barnes got back to the command cabin, Griffin was sitting behind the controls. You ready to fly this bad boy? He asked her. The week before you were born, she said. Are we all ready to go? As soon as the PhDs are on board, he said. He nodded at a monitor. Looks like that's them now. Chief, Griffin said. Yeah? She pointed out of the cockpit towards the sky. I'm gonna knock a hole in that. 10 minutes later, she did, and the Argo was on its way, accompanied by a squadron of F-35s. Damn, we're impressive, he told Griffin. Gathered around a set of digital displays, they got a further briefing. The specimen at this site has been kept entirely off-book, Vivani said, and since it's a more recent discovery, our data is limited, but it seems to be another apex predator. Emma called it Monster Zero, Sarazawa said. An X-ray of the thing was on the screen. It was all horns, claws, and teeth, with a good bit of snake thrown in. He tried to imagine what it would look like with skin on it. It was not a pretty image. It also explained the collective gasp when Godzilla's path converged on this place. Even as Titans went, this looked like a bad one. It may have been a rival alpha to Godzilla, Vivani said, battling for dominance over the other Titans. Mark nodded. That made sense. It was also terrifying. A monster that could rival Godzilla. No thanks. Dr. Chen, Serizawa asked. I've been sourcing through thousands of years of myths and legends, Chen said, but it's almost as if people were scared to even write about it. As if it was meant to be forgotten, Serizawa mused. Mark looked over as Stanton entered. So I hate to crash the party, Stanton said, but I got some bad news. You can just say news, Barnes said. It's always bad. We've lost Godzilla, Stanton continued. Dropped off somewhere near Venezuela. Dropped off? Mark asked. But Stanton seemed excited. I'm telling you, Stanton said. Dr. Brooks was right. It's the Hollow Earth. That's how he moves so fast, using underwater tunnels like wormholes, just like zipping around. He jerked his hands inventively through the air. Mark remembered Brooks. He'd been with Monarch since the 70s, had been involved in the Skull Island situation, and yeah, he'd had this crackpot theory that the Earth was like a Swiss cheese full of gigantic subterranean chambers where monsters hid. Mark hadn't believed it. Godzilla was big, but so was the ocean. Humans had only explored the tiniest fraction of the deep sea, and the crushing black depths that marked the boundaries between continental plates that you could hide any number of Godzilla-sized beasts. They were big, but not that big. But it sounded like Stanton was a believer. Maybe he knew something Mark didn't. Everyone, look sharp, Colonel Foster cut in. We're approaching the base. Madison watched Jonah's men work with mounting anxiety. The drilling continued, but now the mercenaries were placing explosives in the holes. They were going to blast Monster Zero free, but then what? What would it do when it woke up with the explosions going off everywhere? Mothra had freaked out over a few guys with guns, and Mothra had been a baby compared to this thing. Its standing height was estimated at 521 feet. Godzilla only stood 355 feet. If it really was an apex predator, like Mum thought, it would probably react like one. Of course, she imagined Jonah planning to set off charges remotely, but still. They're here, Asher said, looking up from the radar screen. Monarch must have figured out what happened and sent more troops, but Jonah didn't seem worried. Keep them busy, he told Asher. Asher signaled some of the others, and they quickly left the cave. Another fight coming up, Madison thought. Please let it stop. But she knew it wasn't likely to stop anytime soon.